So I have watched Family Law, and one of the things that I've appreciated about the character development of showing members from the two S LGBTQ plus communities in our diversities is really about the humanity of the individual, their family, the connection and the contributions that many of us make every day, and that it is a part of the fabric of the storytelling of a workplace.
Mm.
But then there is compassion and empathy, and the fact that when we look at how do we be, there's a lot of conversations always about how do we build inclusivity and a sense of belonging. And I think simply by including and having the type of conversations which brings our relationships together, showing the difficulties and the challenges, but also the folks that are moving through with support and with care, really is a way of mirroring what can happen in everyday day-to-day life. And certainly with the divisiveness and the pain that comes with divisiveness and the emotions, the sort of the roller coaster ride of the emotions through the storytelling that I've seen, certainly, whether it is Family Law and other stories that are being told, is that there is that link of humanity.
Mm.
Because in many ways, and so many of us and folks who are listening to this podcast episode are perhaps experiencing in their day-to-day, sort of on their micro level, individual, interpersonal relationships, a sense of isolation.
Mm.
And those stories can bring us to a place of perhaps we might feel seen, even though we're not a character, we're not highlighted in the show necessarily, but we see ourselves reflected back in. And so for me, the idea of representation is so important in this time. And for me, excellent storytelling is that way of world building that people feel a sense of connection and hope. And one of the reasons I certainly wanted to have our conversation today is about where do we find the hope, even when we're talking about tragedies,
Mm.
right? And when we're talking about how do we move from privilege and making the collaborations and building connections in community, and that we can own and create our own stories and collaborate with folks like yourself and the beautiful work that Lark Productions is doing, and the deliberate, intentional way and purposeful way that you create stories that hopefully for every Canadian that's watching will see something in that that is a moment of, oh, I didn't know that, or
Mm.
that challenges themselves and finding a sense of hopefulness where they might be feeling isolated or hopeless. And particularly folks coming from sort of historically marginalized communities. So that's really, I think, a part of why this journey and these conversations are so important. Well, my last question for you, and as we move forward in our conversation, is thinking about how can the power of storytelling mobilize communities to reimagine ways we connect and care for each other, particularly in this time.
I mean, it's a big question.
Yeah.
I like to think that like, just exactly as you've described, it's like that one connection. If you've made, if you've changed someone's life, like I am watching, just even on social media, everything going on around heated rivalry and the people that are sort of, coming forward in their experience in sport, as part of the queer community. And it's, um, like that's one version of it. Another version of it is like on Allegiance is like people writing into CBC to sort of say like, there was a story around birth alerts in the Indigenous community and a social worker and an Indigenous woman sort of writing in and saying like, I saw myself in that episode. Thank you for telling, the truth about this story. So, I think there's healing in many ways in these stories. I think that there's education in many ways. I certainly like even in producing something like Allegiance, which again was very intentional, from the creator's point of view and the teams that were put together, like we're learning how to build and look at even our structures differently, and that changes things. But I think the big thing is it's like it's about like you said, representation and everything from, a cast member who's getting their first shot as a day player in an episode, to like there was an actress in season one who, won a UBCP award for it, and or Hudson Williams, who was his first episode of television on Allegiance, or, Law and Order, to get having over 1.6 million people reading a script that, is a new writer. It's like it's exposure too, right? And um I think like it has the opportunity to mobilize and change points of view from the people who are watching it, which I think, again, the broadest audience possible is what we're looking for, because,
Yes.
if we're too narrow in who we're targeting, I worry that the message isn't getting to the people that need to hear it. And I think when you have a show that has a reach, it means that you can impact and change people's understandings of, exactly like you said, the sort of like disrupting what the stereotypes or what people believe they think they know about a community. It can really change the narrative in a way that, like, I hope to have a positive impact, and the shows that we make would have that impact as well.
And from my perspective, the shows are having an amazing impact. And I think it's a ripple effect, right? You have the initial audience that watch the shows and connect from diverse communities. And then you have the people they talk to in their communities about the shows who might not understand what the shows are saying, but feel some kind of connection. And particularly now in our sense of world building and storytelling, where we are creating a new Canadian narrative from coast to coast to coast. We are moving in ways in real life, in real time, redefining who we are as human beings and individuals, and how, whether we, as we move through the pandemic and talking to neighbors or not talking to neighbors, and now all of a sudden, for those of us, myself included, who are introverts, are trying to find ways to connect with people and have conversation. But if you're in an elevator, if you're in a library or a grocery store, wherever you might be going on your day, and you see what's happening with heated rivalry and all of these pieces, and the celebration, when many communities that are represented in that particular show and others are saying, from a mainstream perspective, are being told, you don't belong here, but we know we do.
Mm.
And that representation and that embrace by the prime minister, of the actor, and all of these different moments, these are moments, I think, certainly of hope and of connection, and a sense of belonging that, I'm hopeful will continue through as we mobilize stories on different platforms. And I can't even imagine what storytelling might look like in 10 years from now, which would be 2036. It's astounding.
Hopefully I'll be retired. But one last thing I would just say is, like, I just think that the whole, like, the more we bring our own curiosity and our own humility and our own desire to understand each other, I think that we have the best chance to be entertaining. Like, sometimes I find it's the frustrations and like you said, like, we want to live in hope, right? And so the way to have
Yes.
hope is a way to hear and see each other. And I think that's why, like, again, like a show like Family Law does it really well, where it tackles everything from vaccinations to, you know to, I don't know, again, vaccinations is the thing that I can think of that is, like, so divisive, of, like, it doesn't say which
Yeah.
side of the argument you
Yeah.
need to be on. It just says, I'm here to show you both sides, and to say that,
Yeah.
like, your opinion is you can have your opinion, but my job is to also help provide the background and the information and the human experience that goes along with that. So, um, you know, finding a way to tell those stories authentically is, I think, a goal. And I think sometimes we get it really right, and sometimes we still are working on it. I think that there's a lot of opportunity to, like, empower and partner and collaborate and build a generation of storytellers that are open to that sort of curiosity and sharing a human experience that reflects all of ours.
And that is where I think will be the power of what we're talking about. the idea of multiple generations talking to each other to move us forward as a society. So, with that, I want to be mindful of your time and thank you so much for being here and joining me. And like I was saying for the audience in the beginning, I will have the details of Lark Productions and Erin's bio at the end. So, thank you so much for being Until here. Next time, remember to connect, share, engage, and transform.